my father's come over and to look after my children.
Yeah, okay. So what's your name, first of all?
I'm sorry. Gerard, Gerard.
And your last name, Gerard?
Baden-Clay, Baden.
Yep.
-Clay.
And what's your wife's name?
Allison with 2 L's.
And same surname? Okay, and how old is Allison?
44. But, and...
What time does she normally get back when she goes for a walk?
This morning she was planning to, she has a seminar in the city, so she was planning to leave by, around 7.
Okay.
And, she's not back home yet.
Okay, all right. And what's your wife?
I'm now driving the streets.
He told the police it was a shaving cut. 3 thin scratches raked down the right side of his face, and Gerard Baden-Clay had his answer ready before anyone even asked. A razor. That morning, nothing more. It was the kind of explanation no one questions. And on the 20th of April 2012, when he called emergency services to report that his wife, Allison, had vanished from their home in the quiet Brisbane suburb of Brookfield, no one did. Because Gerard Baden-Clay was the perfect husband. That was the phrase people kept reaching for. The perfect husband. A real estate franchise with his name on the door. A famous bloodline he wore with pride, a descendant of the man who founded the global scouting movement. A name built on honor, on duty, on the promise that you could be trusted. A beautiful home, 3 young daughters, a frightened, grieving man whose wife had simply gone for a walk one morning and never come home. The scratches were just shaving cuts. Everyone accepted it. Except 4 separate forensic experts would later swear, independently and under oath, that those marks were never made by a razor. They were made by fingernails. And beneath the fingernails of Allison's left hand, investigators found DNA that did not belong to her, the trace, the prosecution would argue, of the husband she reached up and clawed as she fought for her life. What you're about to hear is how a man this admired came to wear his wife's last act of resistance on his own face. How 6 kinds of leaves, tangled in a dead woman's hair, would quietly call him a liar. And how the courts of an entire nation would tear themselves apart all the way to the highest bench in the country over what truly happened inside that house. Stay until the end, because there is one detail in this case, hidden inside the very name he was so proud of, that almost no one talks about. And once you see it, you cannot hear a single word he said the same way again. So how does the perfect husband end up wearing his wife's fingernails across his face? To understand what was taken, you first have to understand what was there. Allison June Baden-Clay was born on the 1st of July, 1968, and from the start, she was the kind of person a room arranged itself around. She was crowned Miss Brisbane. She spoke several languages. She traveled the world as a Rotary Exchange student, trained as a dancer, earned her degree bright, disciplined, endlessly capable. She was not a woman waiting for a life to happen to her. She was already living one. And when she met Gerard, she was the one with the standing. It was the mid-90s at the travel company Flight Center, and Allison was an established senior professional in human resources, poised, accomplished, several rungs above the junior man who had just been hired beneath her. She outranked him. Hold on to that detail, because almost everything that came afterward would slowly, quietly turn it upside down. They married. They had 3 daughters across the early 2000s, and by 2012, the eldest was still in primary school. They settled in Brookfield, a green pocket on the western edge of Brisbane, where the streets run beneath gum trees and the houses sit back behind their gardens, the kind of place where nothing bad is supposed to happen. Allison stepped back to raise the girls. Gerard built the public life, his own real estate franchise, the awards, the handshakes, the familiar face everyone in town seemed to know. That was the picture. And like a great many pictures, it was carefully maintained because behind the frame, the foundations were giving way. The business was drowning. The Queensland floods of 2010 and 2011 had gutted the local property market, and Gerard's franchise was buried under debts of more than $500,000. The man who projected success was, in private, sinking, and there was something else eating the marriage from the inside, something Allison did not discover until September of 2011, when a mutual acquaintance finally told her what her husband had been hiding. He was having an affair, not a brief mistake. A long-running relationship with a woman named Toni McHugh, who worked inside Gerard's own business. When Allison found out, the marriage did not end. It entered that fragile, agonizing in-between. Both people still under the same roof, still raising the same children, still sitting across the same dinner table, while one of them tries to decide whether what they built can be saved. They went to counseling. By the accounts of those closest to her, Allison was fighting to hold her family together. What she could not see was how much pressure was massing on the other side of that marriage. A failing business, a debt that would not stop climbing, a mistress still waiting, and a life insurance policy on Allison worth more than $800,000. For most of April 2012, none of it showed. School runs, work, bedtime, the ordinary machinery of an ordinary family. And then came the night of the 19th of April, the last hours anyone can say with certainty that Allison Baden-Clay was alive inside that house. At 15 minutes past 7 on the morning of the 20th of April 2012, Gerard Baden-Clay dialed 000. His wife was gone, he said. She often walked before dawn around 5 in the morning, and today she hadn't come back.
I'm trying to look after my children at the moment. They've got 3 young girls, and we really trust that the police are doing everything they can to find my wife, and we just hope that she'll come home soon.
His voice was the voice of a worried husband, measured, cooperative, a man doing the responsible thing. Within hours, the machinery of a missing person search began to turn. Police arrived at the Brookfield house. Volunteers gathered. Helicopters went up over the gum trees and the gullies of Brisbane's western fringe, searching for a 43-year-old mother who had, it seemed, simply walked out the door and dissolved into the morning. And then the officers inside that house began to notice things. The marks on his cheek he'd already brushed off as a shaving cut, but a razor leaves a particular kind of wound. And this was not it. Some of them looked twice, said nothing, and quietly filed the thought away. Something didn't sit flat. But there was no body, no blood in plain view, no scene. Just a missing woman, a calm husband, and a handful of details that refused to line up. That was the first thing investigators would have to explain. Because if something violent had happened to Allison, where was the evidence of it? No struggle, no pooled blood, no shattered room. A person does not simply vanish from her own home without leaving a trace, and yet, on the surface, that is exactly what appeared to have happened. Hold on to that absence. It becomes one of the central questions in the entire case. The search widened. One day became 2. 2 became a week. The daughters were told their mother was missing. The community that had trusted Gerard rallied around him, and he moved through it as the grieving husband, accepting their sympathy, waiting with them for news. Behind that public face, there was no sign of Allison. Until the 10th day. On the 30th of April, a canoeist drifting down Colo Creek in the rural pocket of Anstead saw something on the muddy bank beneath a bridge. It was Allison. Her body had lain there, exposed to the open air and the water, for 10 days, roughly 13 kilometers from the home she had supposedly walked out of on foot. That distance alone broke the story. A woman who steps out for a morning walk does not end up 13 kilometers away on the far side of the suburb on a creek bank under a bridge. Someone had put her there, and when forensic teams recovered her, they found something that made no sense at first, caught in her hair, snagged in the sleeves of her clothing, plant matter. Vegetation that would one day become the quietest and most devastating piece of evidence in the entire case. At the scene, it was nothing, just leaves clinging to a body in the open. What those leaves actually were and where they truly came from would not be understood until much later. Remember the leaves. The autopsy gave them nothing. 10 days of exposure and decomposition had erased the cause of death. Any injury that might have told the story, a mark at the throat, a blow, a wound, was gone beyond reading. Whatever had been done to Allison Baden-Clay, her own body could no longer testify to it. If the truth was ever going to be proven, it would have to be built from the outside in, from the distance, from the scratches, from the leaves, from the car she may have traveled in after she was already gone. And that work was about to begin. A homicide investigation does not begin with a theory. It begins with a list, and at the top of that list, in almost every case, is the person who reported the victim missing. Queensland police detectives did not start by assuming Gerard Baden-Clay was guilty. They started by testing whether the story he'd given them could survive contact with the evidence. It could not. They began where the doubt had begun his face. 4 independent experts, among them the forensic physician Dr. Margaret Stark, had already handed them the answer, not a razor. Fingernails, with that locked, and the foreign DNA logged from beneath Allison's nails. The case had a shape. What it lacked was a cause, and that was the wall the whole investigation slammed into. The body could tell them she'd been moved. It could not tell them how she had died. You cannot easily charge a man with murder when you cannot name the method of the killing, when there is no weapon, no fatal wound on record, no forensic cause of death at all. This is the part people still argue about today. To one side, it was a fatal hole. How can a court send a man to prison for life when no pathologist can even say what killed the victim's strangulation, suffocation, a blow, a fall? Reasonable doubt, the defense would insist, lived precisely in that silence. To the other side, the absence was not a hole. It was a fingerprint. A body decomposed beyond reading, dumped 13 kilometers from home, is not the work of an accident or a passing stranger. It is the work of someone who knew the victim's routine and who had a powerful reason to make certain the truth could never be recovered. The same fact. Read 2 opposite ways. Hold that tension, because one day the highest courts in the country would split over it. So detectives stopped trying to make the body talk, and they made everything around it talk instead. They went to the family car, a Holden Captiva. Inside, they found a bloodstain. The Dina in it was Allison's. Remember the missing scene at the house, the blood that wasn't where she lived? Here was a thread of it in the boot of the car the family drove every day. A body had to cross 13 kilometers somehow. This was how. Then they turned to the leaves. Detectives bagged the plant matter from Allison's hair and clothing and sent it to Dr. Gordon Geimer at the Queensland Herbarium, one of the few people alive who could read it. What it would tell them would not surface until a courtroom. But when it did, it would speak for Allison more clearly than any living witness. And underneath all of it ran the question every detective asks first and answers last. Why here, The timing did the talking. Allison and Gerard's mistress, Tony McHugh, were both booked to appear at the very same real estate conference on the 20th of April, the day he reported his wife missing. The two halves of his double life were about to walk into the same room, and on the night of the 19th, the last night anyone can place Allison alive, McHugh telephoned him, and, in her own words at trial, lost it. The mistress and the wife about to collide, the man who'd promised to choose, still choosing no one. Behind that single phone call sat everything already crushing him: the debt, the affair, the policy in his name, and then the coldest detail of all. The day after Allison's body was lifted from the creek, before she had even been buried, Gerard contacted the insurer to ask how he might claim the money her death would pay out. Motive: A, means of disposal, a forensic case that flatly contradicted his only explanation. Piece by piece, the calm, cooperative husband was being taken apart by the very thoroughness he'd counted on to protect him. On the 13th of June 2012, police charged Gerard with the murder of his wife and with interfering with her corpse. But charging a man is not the same as proving him guilty. The case still rested on circumstance, a constellation of damning facts, with a hole at the center where the cause of death should be. To convict, the prosecution would have to make all of it speak with one voice. And the witness who would finally do that had no pulse, no name on any list, and had been sitting in an evidence bag since the day they found her body. When the trial opened in the Brisbane Supreme Court in June of 2014, the defense had one path to an acquittal, and it was a clean one. If Allison had died where she was found, if she had walked out one morning, suffered some accident on the bank of Colo Creek, and never got up, then there was no murder. No scene at the house. No body to explain moving across the city. Reasonable doubt would do the rest. Everything depended on keeping her death at the creek. And that is exactly where the Leaves walked into the room. Dr. Gordon Guymer took the stand and laid out what the plant matter had been hiding all along. 6 species, 6 different plants identified leaf by leaf from fragments tangled against her body. All 6 grew at the Baden-Clay home around the patio, the carport, the driveway she knew by heart. At Colo Creek, where her body had lain for 10 days, only 2 of those 6 could be found. Allison had been wearing the garden of the house she was supposed to have walked away from, carried to a creek bank that garden never reached. The leaves were a map, and the map did not point to the creek. It pointed back to the home. That single piece of testimony collapsed the defense's only safe ground. If she picked up that vegetation at the house, then the house, not the creek, was where her life ended. Which forced the next question, the one that had haunted the case from the first morning. If she died at home, why was there no scene? No blood. No struggle. Nothing. Now the blood in the Captiva had its answer. The absence of a scene at the house had never been innocence. It was the opposite, the mark of someone with the time and the composure to clean, to carry, and to drive 13 kilometers into the dark. She had been moved. The 2 ghosts that had hung over this case from the very first morning, the missing scene and the missing blood, closed on a single answer. And that answer was the inside of that house. Against all of it, Gerard Baden-Clay made the gamble of his life. He took the witness stand in his own defense. He denied killing his wife. He clung still to the shaving cut, waving it off as something that had meant nothing, and he asked 12 strangers to believe his word over 4 forensic experts, a botanist, a bloodstain, and a dead woman's fingernails. They listened to him for hours. On the 15th of July 2014, the jury returned. The perfect husband was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 15 years. The shaving cut had finally been answered. The leaves had testified. The case the prosecution built out of pure silence had in the end spoken his name. But a verdict only tells you what a man did. It doesn't tell you what kind of man could do it, and that is the harder question. To understand Gerard Baden-Clay, forget the real estate awards and the grieving face on the evening news. Look instead at what he was actually made of. Because he was made, more than anything, of reputation, and that is where the most disturbing detail in this entire case has been hiding the whole time. He was born in Bournemouth, England in 1970 into a family already in the business of reinventing itself. By 1980 they had crossed the world to Australia, new continent, new start. And somewhere along that road they remade the most basic thing a family owns, its name. Here is the detail I promised you. The original family surname was simply Clay. The Baden was not some ancient inheritance. It was added bolted on before Gerard was ever born to bind the family to Lord Robert Baden-Powell, the founder of the worldwide scouting movement. And the whole movement that man built rests on a single promise, on my honor. On one principle above all others, a scout is trustworthy. Think about that. The aura of honor the Baden-Clay name carried was never earned by the people carrying it. It was manufactured, borrowed, stitched onto a plainer name for the prestige it broadcast to the world. Gerard grew up inside that engineered respectability, and he built his entire life on top of it, his business, his standing, his whole public self, resting on one idea, that his word was good. Now look at the pattern underneath. A double life run for years without a crack. A mistress kept on promises he never meant to keep. Crushing debt buried beneath the costume of success. 10 days spent performing grief in front of the very neighbors, searching for the wife he had dumped under a bridge. That is not a man who lost control in a single bad moment. That is a man for whom the image is the self. That is the framework that fits him, not madness, narcissism. For a personality like this, the polished surface isn't a mask worn over the real person. It is the real person. And anything that threatens to expose it doesn't feel like embarrassment. It feels like death. A wife about to learn everything. A mistress about to detonate it all at a conference. To most people, that is humiliation. To a man like this, it is annihilation. The good name was never just his pride. It was the weapon. The only question left was whether he raised it in cold calculation or in a single, unrecoverable instant. And that question was about to set a nation's highest judges against each other. The fight over what Gerard Baden-Clay had done did not end with the verdict. In December of 2015, the Queensland Court of Appeal did something extraordinary. It downgraded his murder conviction to manslaughter, ruling the evidence couldn't rule out a death he never intended. For one moment, the perfect husband had his answer rewritten in his favor. Then, prosecutors took it to the highest bench in the land. And on the 31st of August 2016, the High Court of Australia unanimously restored the murder conviction. It was final. It remains final to this day. Gerard sits in prison, eligible to apply for parole no sooner than 2029. Tony McHugh has lived in the long shadow of this case ever since. And Allison's 3 daughters were raised by the family who loved her, while her grieving parents turned their pain outward, building a foundation in her name to fight the very kind of harm that took her. The case is closed. But one question was never settled. 3 of Queensland's most senior judges read this evidence and ruled it was not murder. The High Court, just as certain, read the same evidence and ruled that it was. If the finest legal minds in the country could not agree on what happened inside that house, what makes you so sure that you can? If this story moved you, give it a like, share it to raise awareness, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to follow more real-life true crime cases.